Hi, I'm Rhiannon Lambert and welcome to the Gut Diaries. I'm here today chatting to Professor Simon Gaisford all about gut health, his research, his journey. So here's a taste of what's to come.
People say you are what you eat, and I always think you are what your bacteria eat. I really do think that liquid-based products are better than solid-based products. But now I understand there's a lot more to gut health and how that is linked to your propensity to develop a disease.
Hello, Simon, and welcome to the Gut Diaries.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
I think that we're just going to be picking your brains today on so many factors because gut health was not spoken about many years ago.
No.
So how on earth do you transform in your career, lecturing and teaching on these subjects into the conversation of gut health?
So it's about the instruments that I use in my lab. I've got a really good instrument for studying bacteria, and we used to study infectious bacteria, sort of things that make you ill. And then I had a student that wanted to do a project, and we can't study dangerous organisms with a student. So I sent her across the road to go and buy some supplements, and we thought we'd test them instead. And it was just super interesting. And so from there, that's all I've really done.
If we rewind a little bit, let's just touch on what gut health actually is, what it means. The fact that we have what do we call good and bad bacteria within our gut, and the fact that you'd chosen to look into why people were feeling poorly, linking it to the gut.
Sure. Now, I work in a school of pharmacy, and so therefore a pharmacist's mindset is you medicate your way out of a problem. And I think what I've been discovering over the years is that there's so much we don't understand about the gut microbiome and that we are discovering and why it's so important. It just seems to me a really good area to focus on. And if we can make people's guts better without medication, that to me is a win-win. Your gut's a long tube, and as you go further down that tube, you've got more and more bacteria. By the time you get to your colon, you have thousands of different species and trillions of individual bacteria. They actually make up 90% of all the cells in your body. We are providing all these bacteria with a home and food, free lodging, if you like. And so we must get something out of it. In nature, there's never a one-way street. It's always a two-way street. So when people say to me, what is good gut health and what's bad gut health, what I normally say is you've got all these different species of bacteria. They're all eating food and they're all producing waste. But unlike a human who is producing a large stool every day, maybe not every day, depends on what your gut health is. Bacteria are producing individual chemical species, and different species produce different waste compounds. So they turn this indigestible fiber into this soup, if you like, of interesting compounds which your body can use. If it produces something which is an irritant, or even worse, a toxin, that's going to make you feel very unwell, and I call those bad bacteria. And then for me, gut health essentially reduces to how many good bacteria you've got versus how many bad. People say you are what you eat, and I always think you are what your bacteria eat. And so therefore, and we might talk about it in a bit, when people choose a diet to help support their gut health, they should approach that with the view of feeding their gut garden, because that's essentially what they're doing.
Correct me if I'm wrong, it's around 2 kilos of what we weigh bacteria.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, 2 kilos. Yeah. So I think if you're trying to go on a diet, you think, I need to lose a couple of kilos. Those are not the kilos to lose.
Yeah. And what's also, I was having a good read, Simon, just thinking, wow, look at the research trials you've chosen to lead. Is that because you just had a feeling there's something we can do here? There's some way of nurturing that garden and we can manipulate it a bit.
Gut feeling.
There's a gut feeling.
Yes, I think what we did to start with is you always go back to what you know most. And so for me, that's infectious organisms. And so we really started with how can you eradicate a gut infection without using antibiotics.
Lose the weeds.
Without using a weed killer, or at least without using a very general weed killer. And so for me, antibiotics are very indiscriminate in your gut, and they really are quite bad for your gut health. If a doctor says you should take antibiotics, you totally need to follow the doctor's advice. But what I'd like people to recognize is that antibiotics are very broad spectrum and have the capacity to disrupt your gut flora in a not very good way. If you're on antibiotics for a week or 2 weeks, I don't think you'll cause significant damage in the long run and your flora will recover. But if you're on long-term antibiotics, say a teenager on something for acne, you can be on low-level antibiotics for several years. This is much more serious. And I think it's a good idea for people to consider taking some sort of beneficial bacteria as a supplement alongside their antibiotics. You could talk to the GP about that when they prescribe antibiotics.
And that's based on research, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. One really key thing is don't take the supplement at the same time as the antibiotic. Both of those things are going to arrive in your stomach at the same time. The tablet or whatever it is going to dissolve, and the antibiotic concentration is going to be the highest. And that means that any beneficial bacteria you've just swallowed are in a solution of a really concentrated antibiotic. And it should come as no surprise that's going to kill those bacteria. That's unhelpful. So if the antibiotic says take 3 times a day, 8-hour intervals, take a supplement 3 times a day, 8-hour intervals, but space them. Antibiotic first, 4 hours later, supplement, then 4 hours later, antibiotic, and so on.
There's also so many options out there, Simon, and I think for people to navigate what makes a difference when you're choosing items to buy, is it the research behind a product that people really need to be aware of?
These types of products are marketed directly to consumers. And so therefore, there's lots of colourful advertising and fancy packets, and that's fantastic. But really, underpinning all of that is some basic science about whether a product works or not. You can essentially market anything that you like, and no one's really testing it
on that product itself.
On that product, yeah, to test whether it's actually working. And the two requirements here are any bacteria that are contained in the product actually arrive in your colon alive. They've got to get through the stomach, contains acid, and that's quite a challenge. The stomach is there to prevent bacteria from colonizing your gut. So that's a big challenge. And the second one is once they're in the gut, they've got to actually grow and do a job. In my lab, we test a lot of products that are available to consumers, partly because we teach pharmacists, and we want pharmacists to be able to talk to people that come into their pharmacies with sensible advice. It is generally the case, at least for my testing, and people can argue, that products that are dry, so things like tablets and capsules and sachets, in order to make those products, you have to dry the bacteria. You can't make a tablet with a material that's wet. It's got to be dry. And so you freeze dry the bacteria to remove that water, and you're left with a bacterium which is basically a biochemical powder. And then when a consumer swallows those products, those bacteria have got to rehydrate in stomach acid, and that is a significant challenge. And in my testing, at least, which people can argue about, they don't usually recover very well. So I do think that the way that a product is formulated is very important. And I really do think that liquid-based products are better than solid-based products.
Do you notice a similar range of symptoms in those with what we say a poorer gut health?
Generally, most people have the same kinds of symptoms. So the most common ones would be bloating. So you feel bloated. You can either feel bloated all the time, or you can feel bloated after eating certain foodstuffs. The other one is constipation. A lot of people have really bad constipation. In all of the studies I've looked at with various disease groups, and they would be, in no particular order, liver cirrhosis, ulcerative colitis, Parkinson's disease, and children with Down syndrome. In all those patient groups, although it sounds like they're very different diseases, they are all characterized by people having constipation. In all of those groups, people have got constipation.
That's so interesting, such a diverse range of conditions.
So what this is kind of saying is gut health is kind of intimately linked to a large number of conditions, and we're not quite sure why. Does the constipation lead to the disease state or vice versa? We're not at that point. But what I would say to anyone listening is if you've got a relative or you know someone who's gone on to develop some sort of neurological condition, that would be things like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or Huntington. Most of the time when you talk to those people, I will say, did the person have constipation for sort of 10, 20 years before they developed any sort of neurological symptoms? And they'll say, oh yeah. And it's really common.
So what we're saying is that it is in our control to a varying degree. Obviously, education plays a role here in the choices we make within our diets.
Yeah.
Privilege plays a role with access to food.
Yeah.
But essentially, if there were more of a public health drive and focus on our gut health, we would just all reap the benefits of, let's look at what the SMILES trial said with a Mediterranean diet and making us feel happy.
Yeah.
There's a lot to be said for food and mood, isn't there?
It is an unfortunate thing that the cheapest food stuff is carbohydrate, and the cheapest food stuff is processed carbohydrate. And so, as you alluded to just then, wealth and poverty tend to be linked to obesity and health. at the lower end of the wealth spectrum, the only food that you can afford are cheap carbs.
So we really, from hearing about the fact that you're actually actively researching this, you just happen to have the tool in your lab,
Yep.
and now you've found yourself on this journey. How have you personally as well, I guess, changed your outlook on food since starting the trials at the beginning to now?
So if you'd asked me that 10 years ago, I would have said managing gut health was really about stopping feeling bloated or something like that. But now I understand there's a lot more to gut health and how that is linked to your propensity to develop a disease. And I think it's really important that someone really focuses on how they might improve their gut health. And so you can do a number of things.
Okay,
that can
give us
really
top
help
tips.
you. Yeah. So number one is stress. People don't think about stress, but stress and the gut are intimately linked. Everyone's talking about the gut-brain axis, and it should come as no surprise that if you feel stressed, cortisol levels go up. That's not very good for your gut flora. I always think the thing with your gut flora is they're very well established, and so significantly to disrupt that really does take some doing.
Okay, that's good, everybody. So
Yeah,
tip
that's
one
right,
is
yeah.
stress.
So long-term stress
Yes.
would not be good. So that's one. Another one is exercise. Regular exercise is always good. Gets the blood flowing, blood oxygen levels up. There's no reason not to take regular exercise. Diet, as we've talked about already. If you look at an ultra-processed bar, sweet bar, to name no names, there'll be a very defined number of ingredients. They're all ultra pure. And that is not how food comes in nature. And also, most of that stuff is just instantly absorbed in your small intestines. So your gut's not getting anything. So you're effectively, you might feel like you're eating yourself, but you're actually starving
That's
your gut.
so interesting. So if everyone visualizes, the first thing it hits the intestines, it's kind of gone. And then by the time you get to the
Yeah.
end, which is why bowel movements then get poorer,
Yeah,
because
that's
you're
right.
just
Yeah,
not
nothing
getting
to
that
squeeze
bulk.
on. Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. So fiber is bulking up your stool as well. So there's nothing for your gut to grip on. And then the last top tip would be to think about supplementation. I normally say to people, try some and find out what works for you.
So before we wrap up today, Simon, what are the most common misconceptions surrounding bacteria?
Yeah, for me, Donald Trump. Donald Trump is a germaphobe. And so most people think bacteria, germ, bad. And so the big thing for me is that gut bacteria are actually good.
Okay, and how do we get people talking about gut health?
Well, I think watching conversations like this, super important. I think people don't like talking about their gut health because they think it's embarrassing or
Poo's
no
not
one
sexy.
Yeah, no, poo's not sexy. And I don't think we're trying to make it sexy, but it is important that we are able to have these conversations. And so, yeah, I think just simple, straightforward conversations like this, I hope it inspires people to sit around at their own breakfast tables and have their own conversations.
That's incredibly helpful. Simon, I cannot thank you enough for sharing all of your wisdom today on the Gut Diaries.
You're very welcome. Thank you.